On January 18th, my junior mental health nursing class attended the Glore Psychiatric Museum, which, according to stjosephmuseum.org, holds 130 years of the hospital's history as well as centuries of history on mental health treatment. Originally known as State Lunatic Asylum No. 2, it was opened in 1874 and held 25 patients, but over the years held and treated thousands. The goal of the institution, according to Dr. George Catlett, the first superintendent, was to do the noble work of reviving hope and dispelling the clouds that penetrate the intellects of a diseased mind. In medieval times, mental illness was known simply as madness and was believed to be caused by the presence of demons and sin in the mind. Treatment for mental illness was torture and imprisonment. People would be tied up in courtyards of their villages to be mocked, beaten, and burned. Others would be imprisoned in dungeons until starvation. A crude understanding of the human mind was reflected in some of the first surgical treatment attempts of mental illness, trepanation being the first. Trepanation is the process of removing a piece of the skull in order to release the apparent demons that lived inside the head, which were causing the mental illness. Mental health institutions began to open in the United States in the early 1800s, where patients would be treated rather than tortured. Although this was a significant breakthrough for mental health care, patients were still considered subhuman and were thus treated accordingly. Patients' files would be stamped with the words "client cannot refuse," which permitted doctors to conduct experimental procedures without patient consent. Patients who were misbehaving according to the institution's standards would be restrained in boxes such as the one shown here, having their arms and legs strapped to the sides where they would be left for days or months. Patients were also strapped into chairs, such as this one, where they would spend their entire lives in confinement. They would eat here, sleep here, and use the bathroom here, all while having their hands, legs, and body restrained and their head covered with a sack. As doctors and scientists began to explore the inner workings of the human brain in the early 1800s, many began to believe that it was the source of mental illness. Though they were on the right track, their theories were not based in solid evidence. One of these theorists, Franz Joseph Gall, came up with the theory of phrenology, which asserted that the size and shape of the skull determined natural strengths, limitations, and general tendencies of individuals. This practice was based on the theory that the brain has compartmentalized sections responsible for specific functions. Although this theory was incorrect, Gall's predictions that thoughts, feelings, and personality traits were localized in parts of the brain was an important step towards understanding the human mind. Shock therapy was a common practice in psychiatric facilities across the country. This is a picture of a tub where hydroshock therapy was performed. This treatment was based on the assumption that either cold or hot water could shock the patient's body in a way that would stop their hysterical episodes. It was believed that it would help to calm them down as well. Patients would be placed in these tubs for hours with only their head above the cloth restraint. Other forms of shock and convulsion therapy began to surface around the 1940s and 50s, such as insulin coma therapy and electroshock convulsion therapy. During insulin shock therapy, patients would be given injections of insulin that would send their bodies into a coma. The treatment would reset the patient's electrical brain activity, and the patient would then be brought back using glucose. The treatment was believed to help those with schizophrenia, though it had a high death toll. Electroconvulsion therapy was conducted by passing electrical currents through a brain in order to induce a seizure. It was believed that it could change a person's brain chemistry in a way that would reverse mental illness. Although it was found to be helpful for many patients, it was also rather dangerous at the beginning of its use. It was often done without anesthesia and could cause severe memory loss and broken bones due to the severity of the convulsions. It was also often used as a form of punishment rather than treatment. As scientists began to understand more about the brain, it was discovered that the genesis of mental illness lies in the connection between neurotransmitters. This advancement helped bring mental illness treatment into the modern ages, and research on psychiatric medication began to take off. Psych meds were introduced in the mid-20th century and quickly became the mainstay of treatment for mental illness due to its remarkable effects. It even found a market for the average citizen who wanted to escape from the occasional anxiety and mood instability. The popularity of these medications continue to rise today as millions of Americans are prescribed annually. Other alternative therapies were explored as a way to alleviate symptoms of mental illness, one of these being music therapy. Music therapy offers patients alleviation from long periods of inactivity and helps them with symptoms of restlessness and agitation by giving them something constructive to do. It can also help them learn how to sustain their attention on a single activity for a prolonged period of time. This kind of multisensory stimulation is beneficial for a wide variety of mental illnesses and helps an individual foster a sense of belonging and engagement with their environment, which promotes an overall better quality of life. Art therapy was also an incredibly important therapy to patients with mental illness. It offered them a safe and constructive space where they could freely express their inner thoughts and frustrations, free from judgment or punishment. It encouraged patients to develop healthy coping mechanisms while promoting self-discovery and emotional growth.